Hello everyone, I hope you're well. I am so sorry that this video is so late going up. Dracula was actually my pick for my September book club and it's just taken me so long to read it, and you probably have noticed that Halloween has stopped going at the moment. I was going to make a video every day in October, but I've just had so much stuff going on in my life. But finally things are settling down a bit more, so Halloween is going to continue. So from now on, for the rest of October, I will be making a video every day. So let's just get into the Dracula review. So this is Dracula by Bram Stoker. I chose it for the September book club because I thought it would be a nice creepy read to get us in the mood for October. This has been my most popular book that I have ever chosen in the history of my book club. So I have some amazing reviews to read out. All your reviews were so good, they were so detailed, so many great points that I hadn't even thought of. So about this book, it was published in 1897. It's a classic, vampires and all that. It has inspired so many films, so many plays, so many songs, so many things have been inspired by this book. I'm going to give you a brief plot overview because there's so many different characters, there's so much different things going on. But when it begins, a man called Jonathan is helping someone called Count Dracula buy a house in London, and Count Dracula lives in Transylvania. So Jonathan has to go to Transylvania and he has this spooky stuff going on with the Count. I will say as well, all this is told through letters, journals, diaries and newspapers. That's the only way this book is told, is from someone else writing it down from their point of view of the situation. So we find out about the spooky going on at Count Dracula's house through Jonathan's journal. Jonathan is writing letters back to his fiancée Mina, who is in London, and then we flip to Mina, and Mina hasn't heard from Jonathan in a while. He hasn't sent a letter. She's really quite worried about him. We then meet Mina's friend Lucy, and Lucy is deciding who she wants to marry, and she's been asked by different men who want to marry her. So she's kind of deciding, and one of those men is someone called Dr. Stewart, and she turns down Dr. Stewart. Dr. Stewart works at an asylum and it keeps going to one of his patients in the asylum, and there's something going on with his patient and he doesn't quite know what. And then Lucy, something happens to her. I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't read it, but something happens to her, and then Count Dracula gets involved, and then something happens to Lucy, and then it just descends into kind of a group of men trying to track down Count Dracula, because Count Dracula, when he bites you, you turn into this undead monster creature who has to be killed by a stake through your heart. And so they want to track down Count Dracula to stop him doing this, and he bites Lucy and then he bites Mina. So they need to desperately find Count Dracula to save Mina. And that's the plot of the book. My opinions on it is I tabbed, you can see, beautiful moments that I thought were really gorgeous and really beautifully written, but I did feel like it kind of lost its way in the middle. When we'd had the whole, I loved Lucy bits, I loved Mina's bits, but then when it got into Dr. Stewart and the group of men, it's Dr. Stewart, Van Helsing and some other men, are trying to track down Dracula, and it got into that group, I just wasn't very interested in them, and I think it's because we didn't know anything about them. I didn't really know anything about Dr. Stewart. I knew that he'd been turned down by Lucy, and I knew that he worked in an asylum, but I didn't feel like I knew him as a character, so I just wasn't very interested in what he had to say about things, because he didn't feel like a real character because I didn't know him, and I didn't really feel the romance that he had for Lucy because we hadn't seen it. So everything's just told, Lucy is saying to Mina in a letter, I've been asked to marry by this man called Dr. Stewart who works in an asylum. That's kind of it. And so you don't have the kind of first hand when he asked her to marry him and someone else narrating it kind of situation, and then Dr. Stewart saying his real deep and dark feelings about the situation and how he feels. I don't feel like we got a lot of that. We got a bit of Dr. Stewart's disappointment and his love for Lucy when Lucy was dying, and he really felt overwhelmed with love, but she chose someone else to be her fiance, and so you didn't find Dr. Stewart, you didn't feel sorry for him because I felt like you didn't know enough about him, and who she chose to be her fiance, he really loved her, so it was a great match. He loved her, she loved him. It was a great situation there. So I didn't care for Dr. Stewart, so when it got to his bits I was like, oh, I don't really feel like I know him very much. I don't feel like we got enough Van Helsing, because Van Helsing is kind of this mysterious character who just comes out of nowhere and is going to try and save the day, and then I just felt we didn't really get a lot from his side. And then I found Jonathan a bit boring because then Jonathan's like kind of journal gets back into it, but he didn't really talk about what happened with Count Dracula at the house. Like, we'd had at the beginning his journal entries, what was happening with him and the Count, and then I thought later on we'd have another account where he would say like everything that happened and really go into detail about the whole situation. But I didn't feel like he did, and it was like, oh. My favourite bit was the beginning when Dracula had Dracula, bro. I keep calling him Count or Dracula, like not this together. I just call him Dracula. When Dracula had Jonathan and Jonathan had gone to Dracula's, that whole thing was absolutely amazing. I actually made 2 videos. One was called Children of the Night, and it was kind of like a dramatic art piece, and then when it got to Lucy's bits, I made a video called Lucy, which was kind of a character profile of Lucy. So I was really inspired by this book, so I definitely did like it, and the detail of the writing really did inspire me to make those kind of arty videos. But I don't know, I feel like it had fantastic moments and then it had slower moments, and that's my review. I didn't like really dislike it, but it wasn't like I absolutely adored this book. It's my favourite book. I love it. I don't know if I would ever reread it. I would definitely reread the passages that I've highlighted, and that's the thing about if you highlight passages in a book, then you don't have to reread the whole thing. You can just reread your favourite moments. So these are my favourite moments that I will reread. But it was just like yeah, it was an interesting book. It had fabulous moments, it had not so fabulous moments. That's my opinion on the book. It went on a little bit at times. That's it. I'm now going to put on the screen the pictures of your books and your editions of Dracula. There was loads of different editions. I don't think anyone had the same copy of Dracula, which is actually really rare for like the book club, because normally it comes out in one kind of format. Because this book was published so long ago, no one had the same format, and it's been so successful, the book, so it's been published in beautiful, lovely editions. I loved everyone's editions, and a lot of the editions I had never seen before, so it was really interesting to actually get to see all of them and read all your reviews that you'd put on your own Instagram accounts as well about what you thought of Dracula in more kind of depth than what you'd sent to the book club, because the book club's just like send in a little review, I'll read it out, that's it. But obviously on your own Instagram accounts you can go into a lot more detail about like what your favourite scenes were and different stuff like that. So now the time has come, the most important time of the video, to read out your reviews. I have my laptop here, so I'm going to get straight into it. First up, Morticia Cassavetes. Sorry if I said your last name there, I'm sure I did. Love the video. I just finished Dracula and I have to say it was totally different reading as an older adult than when I was in college. I believe one of my favourite quotes from the book is, "You go wake those maids, flick them in the face with a wet towel and flick them hard, make them get heat, fire and warm bath. Lol." That cracked me up. Also, I love English classics because everything can be cured with a bit of brandy. Yeah, that was so true. There was like really dramatic bits and it was like, just get the brandy, just get the brandy. Seen a dead body, just get the brandy. It was very bizarre. I even bought some Ariete brandy, which was Agatha Christie's favourite. I just wish it would have helped my flu I have now. Well, I hope your flu is better, and thank you so much for your comment. Next up we have one from ODS Balkan. I finished Dracula and I mostly agree with your assessment so far. The beginning was really good, but after that it gets slower and slower. I'm glad I read it because it's so important culturally, but I don't plan to pick it up again. I kind of agree, like I don't feel like I'll reread it, and it did get slower and slower. As I said, my favourite bit was Jonathan and Count Dracula, and then my second favourite was Mina and Lucy's relationship, and then obviously when Lucy dies, I just feel like, yeah, it did really slow down, but that's because it goes more into Dr. Stewart and I just wasn't as interested in him, to be honest. Next up is by Joella Z. Dracula is interesting at first when it's from the point of view of Jonathan, but then it switches point of view and it becomes so boring. That's why I have a particular hatred towards it. I was getting so into it with Jonathan's point of view, and then it switches point of view and it loses all its magic and it never regains it. It becomes shallow. I thought Dracula would talk about immortality and really deep like Frankenstein, but no, it's just an evil vampire who barely shows up for the rest of the book. Yep, oh, I forgot to say that Dracula's hardly in it. Yep, thank you for reminding me. Dracula is really not in it. He's just being hunted by everyone else, and that's the idea of it, is that everyone is trying to track down Dracula and find out where he is, and he's this mysterious creature. But if you want any kind of real interaction with Dracula within it, like you will get in the film adaptations, you're not going to get any of that within the book. Next up, Rosie Vince. I'm so glad I finally read this book. I don't read a lot of classics, but found the writing style enjoyable, and the story had a great atmosphere, very creepy, great for reading at night, although I did laugh every time Dracula was described as having a moustache. Not sure why I found it funny. I didn't expect it to be written in the form of letters and journal entries, but I think it worked well, and I liked the different characters' writing. It's inspired me to try some more classic horror. Frankenstein! Try Frankenstein! It's my favourite book by Mary Shelley. I love Frankenstein. And the thing, I don't want to compare Dracula and Frankenstein. I said before I sat down, I was like, Hannah, do not mention Frankenstein. But I'm just going to do like a little... In Frankenstein, it has a lot more depth to it because there is a chapter from the monster's point of view. So Frankenstein's monster gets to say his feelings of abandonment, and that is a really deep chapter. And I loved that, and the whole idea of like creation and creating something and then abandoning it. That's a lot kind of deeper. So yeah, read Frankenstein, please. I love it. I need to like pick it 1 week for the 1 month for the book club. A week, I mean, that would be a struggle, but 1 month for the book club, I definitely need to pick Frankenstein. And as I said, it is letters, journals, the format is told in, and newspaper articles, so they'll be reading about something that's like, oh, that's a bit creepy, and then it will happen to one of them. So there's a bit in it where a wolf escapes, and that's in the newspaper, and then one of them is in bed and there's a wolf outside her window, so it always relates to the characters in some way. Next up, Adventures in Ink. I haven't read a classic in so long, but this was a pleasant but creepy surprise. I loved the dark seasonal atmosphere that definitely had me in the mood for pumpkins. My favourite part has to be set in Dracula's castle. I did find some parts repetitive, with Lucy's plot especially. I want to just scream, she's a vampire, you fools! It may be said the plot turned a bit too convenient for the main characters, but I honestly enjoyed the story for what it was. Some beautiful writing, and finally getting to read the source material of an infamous character. Yep, definitely get what you mean about your favourite bit being Jonathan's in the castle, which is just at the beginning of the book. That's it, right at the beginning. Jonathan Dracula's castle is just, oh, it's amazing, it's great. I felt that bit could have been longer, and I really thought Jonathan was going to revisit in like he did kind of in a dream, but I thought when it got into that bit, he was really going to go back into it, but he didn't, and that for me was my favourite bit. Next up, Apple Smith 3. I just finished this and I'm so glad you chose it. I enjoyed the dark atmosphere and the journey they had to take to stop Dracula. My favourite character was Mina and her journal entries. She's a smart woman that was appreciated in a time when women were basically brood mares for their husbands. All of them respected her mind, especially Van Helsing. This is now one of my favourite classics. I'm really glad that you did enjoy it. Sarah Rose Books. I enjoyed this. It's been a while since I read this, so I don't remember much. I was surprised how much I liked Mina and Lucy's story when they were in Whitby, and I found the women much more interesting than the men. Jonathan was a wet lettuce. The plot did drag and get repetitive towards the middle, and it ended quite abruptly, and Van Helsing's speeches were so long and boring. I did like the spooky atmosphere though, and I liked Mina the best. I really liked Lucy and Mina as well. I feel like they were the best characters, and I wonder if it's because Bram Stoker, because obviously at the time if it was written, the women have so much more emotion and they show their emotion a bit more, and maybe that's because at the time they were like, oh, women are so emotional, men, you know, they can just be sturdy, and women are these emotional creatures. But that worked for me because I wanted to hear about the people's emotion, and I feel like with no one else you really got that emotion, so maybe it's because he'd just, at the time, you know, women are the over emotional ones, so they were the ones really having... Sorry if the lighting's weird, it's basically, I'm filming during the day but it's raining outside, so the lighting's like changing, but I liked the emotional side of the women. I thought that was easier to connect with because the men were a little bit robotic at times, I felt. Lyrophilia. I enjoyed rereading Dracula. I have to agree it dragged a little bit from time to time in the middle, but I didn't mind much because I always picked it up again. I liked the dark, eerie atmosphere and it was suspenseful. I liked Jonathan's journal and his time with the Count in the castle, the way he described the supernatural things he saw and how he started to doubt his own mind. He's the only one till the end who actually met/knows Dracula and who was psychologically affected and tormented by him and his brides. It was interesting to see how it affected Jonathan. I loved the way Lucy and Mina's transition to vampirism was described. The female vampires were very creepy, especially towards the end when they tried to lure Mina and threaten Van Helsing. It was fascinating to see Reynolds' obsession with Dracula, the adaptation of internal life and Dracula's ruthlessness. I seem to be one of the few people who liked Van Helsing and his dry sense of humour. I guess he does babble a lot, but he's also hilarious, compassionate, brave and very human with his worries and fears. Am I the only one who felt a bit uneasy with the description of how the vampires and the tombs smelled? Yeah, it did go into so much description of stuff. I'm glad you were like, you wanted to keep reading it, because I felt like when I put the book down, I didn't really have the motivation to pick the book up, and I don't really know why. I just wasn't that inspired to get back into reading it. So I'm glad that you were and you really liked it. Next comment is from Christina Varel. I have read Dracula for the first time and it was definitely a surprising book. I didn't truly believe Bram Stoker was able to write something that could still crawl under my skin. In this day and age when vampires are a popular concept in the media, it was a pleasant read for the most part, but it could have cut some of Van Helsing's, at times, never-ending speeches and made the Count a more active part of the story. I would the Renfell bits, although didn't disappoint. I also thought the journaling format was perfect here. It built the story nicely and made the anxiety of a moment, the chasing of a monster, appear more genuine. I think Dracula is a good horror classic that could have been explored further, but even on its own it doesn't fail to send chills up my spine. I agree. I did find it like very haunting and creepy at times, and genuinely creepy, and I'm someone who watches a lot of horror films, and modern day horror films are very, you know, disturbing and everything and very extreme, but it was just creepy the way the suspense was built in the castle with Jonathan, as that was my favourite bit, the suspense just being like little bit. I really liked that. I then have JJ Amira of Words and Coffee. A little after September, but here's my review. I mainly listened to the audiobook, which I highly recommend. I've never read anything by Bram Stoker, and to be honest, I never had Dracula on my mind as a book I would like to read. And that being said, I am so glad you chose it. It's become one of the best books I've read this year. I loved all the characters. At times the way of Van Helsing reminded me of Poirot, who I love. I love Poirot too. I loved that even as a short book I was able to appreciate each and everyone and its big cast of characters. The fact that we weren't allowed to know a lot about Count Dracula kept me wanting to read on, because they were keeping him so mysterious. The last account of them all together with him really gave me the chills that I had to reread it. This book was an amazing read. Can't wait for October's read. And October's read is Rebecca, if anyone doesn't know, so feel free to join in with Rebecca. I am really glad that you really loved this book, and it's interesting that this wasn't a book that you really wanted to read, you said, but then you really fell in love with it and really loved it. So I'm glad that you liked it. Next up I have Evelyn M. Campascio. I've read and listened to Dracula, but this time I listened to it on Librivox with a full dramatic cast. It was so amazing. It gave me all the chills from the previous reads and more. It let me experience the story like it was my first go around. I highly recommend listening to it on Librivox with a full cast, and it's free. Frankenstein's next! Yes, you are going to absolutely love Frankenstein. If you like Dracula, Frankenstein is kind of Dracula but more deep, more emotional. The last comment is from Opel Ewing. Finally finished. The beginning of the book was the best part. Jonathan's adventures was so chilling and creepy. I couldn't stop turning the pages. Then it hit a sudden halt and we jumped into the other characters' stories. It took me a while for me to appreciate and learn to like them, but I thought Bram Stoker did a good job of making each character's voice sound unique. I loved all the darker parts of the book. Lucy's stories, the blood baptism, the asylum, bats, rats, wolves, the empty ship in the storm, and the three sisters. However, the further along in the book, the slower paced and more spread out the events seemed to be. especially the last 100 pages or so. I had a hard time getting through all the talking and planning and discussing. I was also irritated by the fact that Van Helsing was miraculously knew all about vampires and yet held on to information just until the right time. I get that the others wouldn't have believed him, but they had not experienced the terror firsthand. But it seemed like he was walking encyclopedia, ready to save the day and dump knowledge on us as needed. Besides that, the ending wasn't bad, but it could have been so much darker, or at least more explosive. Overall, I really enjoyed this book, and I had a great time reading it, even though some parts were slow. Stoker's ability to create a chilling mental image and conjure up the illusion of scent, sound, or emotion really left a vivid picture in my mind, and those are the parts I hold on to and appreciate most. Great comment, like fabulous comment. Can I just say, Opel, I do stalk you on your Instagram and I love that you've done like a makeup look. Look up Opel's Instagram, and she did like this makeup look for Dracula that was really creepy and I really liked it. So yeah, I do stalk you on Instagram. Sorry about that, babe, but I loved the like makeup look that you've done with it. And great comment. All the comments were so good. Like, I love just getting your comments and reading them all, and I screenshot them and I put them in a file, and I don't read them till I finish the book because I don't want to be inspired by anyone else's opinion or like change my opinion. And then when I read them all, I was like, oh my god, so many points that I hadn't even thought about, so many great points. So thank you so much for everyone who read Dracula. Rebecca is our October pick, so tell me if you are reading Rebecca, let me know down below. Halloween is back on. We've still got, you know, like half a month basically, not really, but like basically half a month worth of videos that are going to go up every day. So I hope you will watch my Halloween videos, and I hope you're going to join in with Rebecca, and I will see you tomorrow for another video.